The rhythm of the night was broken only by the rhythmic drumming of a torrential downpour against the glass and the haunting, steady drone of a flatline. Inside the sterile, cold walls of the Metropolitan Veterinary ER, the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and the heavy weight of defeat. Dr. Aris leaned back, his shoulders slumped under the crushing fatigue of a 12-hour shift. He slowly reached out, his fingers trembling slightly as he turned off the heart monitor. The silence that followed was deafening. "Time of death, 2:14 a.m., he whispered to the empty room. "We did everything we could, but his heart just wasn't strong enough to fight the toxins." The assistants bowed their heads, the atmosphere turning into a tomb as they prepared to cover the lifeless body of a family's beloved companion. The battle was lost, or so they thought. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the clinic didn't just open. They exploded inward, caught in a gust of wind and fury. Standing there was a man who looked like he had been forged in the very heart of the storm. He was tall, his frame filling the doorway, clad in a tactical jacket that dripped rainwater onto the linoleum floor like a ticking clock. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's and cold as ice, scanned the room before landing on the operating table. Beside him stood a German shepherd, a beast of pure muscle and discipline, its eyes reflecting a strange, human-like intelligence. This wasn't a grieving pet owner. This was Jacob, a man whose past was buried in classified files and blood-stained Sansa, former Navy SEAL who had seen death too many times to let it take another soul without a fight. "Step aside," Jacob's voice crackled like dry leaves, low but carrying an undeniable authority that froze the doctors in their tracks. Dr. Aris tried to protest. "Sir, you can't be in here, he's gone." But Jacob didn't listen. He moved with a predatory grace, reaching the table in 3 long strides. He didn't use a defibrillator or adrenaline. Instead, he placed his large, scarred hand over the dog's cold chest, his fingers finding a very specific, hidden pressure point known only to elite field medics in the most desperate combat zones. He leaned in, his lips inches from the dog's ear, and whispered 2 words that sounded less like a plea and more like a command. "Not yet." For 5 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The rain continued to howl. Then, a miracle shattered the silence. A sharp, violent gasp tore through the dog's throat. The golden retriever's legs jerked, and the heart monitor, which had been a flat, silent line, suddenly erupted into a frantic, rhythmic beep, beep, beep. The staff gasped, retreating in a mixture of awe and terror. They had just witnessed a resurrection. Jacob didn't stay for the applause or the questions. He simply nodded to his own dog, Max, and turned back toward the storm, leaving the doctors to wonder if they had just encountered a guardian angel or a ghost from a war that never ended. Who is this mysterious man who can command life back into the dead? Is it a secret military technique or something much more dangerous? This is the beginning of a journey into the dark underbelly of the city, where secrets are deadlier than bullets. You are watching the recap of The Guardian's Shadow. If you're ready to uncover the mystery of Jacob and his loyal companion Max, don't forget to like this video, hit that subscribe button, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss a single pulse-pounding chapter of this urban thriller. Now, let's dive deeper into why the shadows are starting to bleed. Leaving behind the chaos of the city, we are drawn into the suffocating silence of the high mountains, where Jacob Miller has chosen to bury his soul. At 35, Jacob should be in the prime of his life, but his silhouette tells a different story. One of a man who has seen the world burn and carried the embers home in his pockets. A former Navy SEAL, Jacob is a machine built for war, now trying to function in a world of peace that feels alien to him. Every morning is a ritual of discipline. He moves with a calculated precision, a ghost haunting his own life, hiding away in a town where the shadows of the pines are the only things that don't ask questions about his past. But Jacob isn't just lonely, he is haunted. The scars on his body are nothing compared to the jagged edges of PTSD that tear at his mind every time the wind howls too loudly or a floorboard creaks. He lives in a self-imposed exile, a fortress of solitude where the only currency is silence. To the townsfolk, he is a mystery, a shadow that buys supplies and disappears. But to us, the viewers, we see the cracks in his armor. We see a man who keeps his back to the wall, even when he's alone. A man whose retirement is less of a rest and more of a long, slow wait for a war that he can't quite believe is over. In this world of isolation, there is one heartbeat that keeps Jacob grounded: Max. Max is not your average pet. He is a 5-year-old German Shepherd who carries the same heavy history as his master. A retired canine, Max is the sole survivor of the same elite unit that Jacob once led. He is a warrior in a fur coat, his ears always twitching, his nose always catching scents of threats that aren't there. When Jacob wakes up screaming from a nightmare of sand and fire, it is Max's cold nose and steady breathing that pull him back to the present. They are two veterans of a forgotten war, discarded by the system, but bound by a blood oath that transcends the barrier between human and animal. The bond between Jacob and Max isn't just about companionship, it's a spiritual synchronization. They don't need words, they communicate through shifts in posture, the narrowing of eyes, and the shared silence of those who have seen the abyss. They are not master and dog, they are a single tactical unit, a living entity of survival that exists on the fringes of society. Max is Jacob's external soul, the only part of him that still knows how to love, while Jacob is Max's purpose. Together, they are a ticking clock, waiting for the moment when their specialized skills will be called upon once more. Because in a world this dark, a man like Jacob and a dog like Max can never truly stay in the shadows forever. The tranquility of Ashridge didn't just fade, it was shattered. As the sky over the town bruised into a deep, suffocating purple, the clouds finally broke, unleashing a cold, relentless downpour that turned the streets into shimmering veins of black ink. Jacob moved through the rain like a ghost, his collar turned up against the wind, with Max's loyal German Shepherd pacing rhythmically by his side. They were men of habit, but tonight, the rhythm of the rain was interrupted by a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A sharp, thunderous screech of twisting metal echoed from the direction of the town's relief warehouse, followed by a dull, heavy thud that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath their feet. Max froze instantly, his body tensing into a coil of muscle. A low growl vibrated in his chest, not a growl of aggression, but one of urgent alarm. Jacob didn't need a command to know something was wrong. "Go, Max," he hissed. The dog bolted, his paws splashing through the puddles as he raced toward the warehouse. Jacob followed, his lungs burning with the cold air. The warehouse, a sanctuary for those struggling in the town, now looked like a looming titan in the dark. The side door was slightly ajar, swaying rhythmically in the wind, groaning on its hinges like a dying breath. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wet concrete and old dust. Max's barking led Jacob to the back of the facility, where the shadows were deepest. There, amidst a graveyard of overturned crates and spilled supplies, lay a nightmare. A massive industrial metal shelf had buckled, its heavy frame pinning a small, golden figure to the cold floor. It was Scout, the young, spirited rescue dog in training that the whole town had grown to love. The pup was motionless, his bright fur matted with grime, trapped beneath a weight that no animal should ever have to bear. "Scout! Oh God, no!" a voice cried out from the darkness. Noah, a young volunteer with a face pale as a sheet, stumbled forward, followed closely by the warehouse manager, a woman whose usual stern composure had vanished into a mask of pure horror. They had been working late, organizing the last of the donations when the shelf gave way. The panic in the room was palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket that paralyzed everyone but Jacob. Noah reached out with trembling hands, but the sheer weight of the metal was immovable. The scene was a chaotic symphony of rain drumming on the tin roof and the frantic sobs of the onlookers. Jacob knelt beside Max, who was gently nudging Scout's ear with his nose, whimpering in a way that broke the heart. Scout didn't move. His eyes were closed, his breathing so shallow it was almost invisible. The silence of the dog was more terrifying than the crash itself. In that moment, the warehouse felt less like a shelter and more like a tomb. Jacob looked at the heavy iron pressing down on the young life beneath it, knowing that every second of hesitation was a second closer to a tragedy Ashridge would never forget. The tires scream against the wet asphalt as Jacob pushes the engine to its absolute limit. Every second feels like an eternity, the rhythmic thumping of his own heart drowned out by the terrifying silence coming from the back seat. He arrives at Dr. Sarah Clean's private clinic like a whirlwind, bursting through the doors with the limp, blood-stained body of Scout in his arms. The sterile smell of antiseptic hits him a cold, clinical contrast to the raw heat of his desperation. Dr. Sarah Cleany, a woman who has seen 1,000 tragedies, takes one look at the dog and feels the heavy weight of the inevitable. She checks the pulse, lifts an eyelid, and watches the flatline on the monitor. Her voice is soft, practiced in the art of delivering grief. "Jacob, I'm so sorry. There's no heartbeat. He's gone. He's clinically dead." The room falls into a suffocating silence, broken only by the distant hum of the air conditioner. To any medical professional, this was the end of the story. But Jacob doesn't step back. He doesn't weep. Instead, a terrifyingly sharp focus settles over his features. He pushes Sarah aside with a strength that brooks no argument. He doesn't start standard CPR. There are no frantic chest compressions or mouth-to-snout breaths. Instead, he begins a series of rhythmic, precise strikes to specific nerve points along Scout's spine and ribcage. His fingers move with the calculated grace of a master pianist, playing a forbidden sonata, applying pressure to areas that aren't even mentioned in modern veterinary textbooks. Sarah watches, paralyzed between professional indignation and pure awe. "What are you doing? You're going to break his ribs!" she cries out, reaching to stop him. But Jacob's aura is different now, heavy, ancient, and dangerously determined. He isn't just trying to jumpstart a heart. He looks like he's trying to drag a soul back from the threshold of the afterlife. The tension in the room is thick enough to cut, a battle between Sarah's cold science and Jacob's inexplicable, hidden knowledge. Sweat beads on Jacob's forehead, dripping onto the cold metal table. He leans down, his lips inches away from Scout's tattered ear. In a voice so low it's almost a vibration, he whispers, "Don't you dare give up on me. Not yet. Come back." It isn't a plea, it's a command. At that exact moment, his thumb presses deep into a point just behind the dog's skull, and a sudden, violent jolt racks Scout's entire body, as if an invisible bolt of lightning had just struck the room. The silence in the room is shattered by a ragged, desperate gasp. Scout's chest heaves, his lungs suddenly pulling in air as if he's been underwater for a lifetime. The impossible has happened. In the dim light of the workshop, the dog that was moments away from death is now shivering, alive, and looking at Jacob with wide, soulful eyes. Jacob stands frozen, his hands still tingling with a strange, residual warmth. He hasn't just saved a life, he has defied the natural order. But there is no joy in his expression, only a deep, haunting realization that his quiet world is about to be torn apart. Word of the Ash Ridge miracle spreads faster than a forest fire. By morning, the quiet streets are buzzing with a frantic energy. In a town where nothing ever happens, the story of the man who brought a dead dog back to life becomes a local legend overnight. Neighbors who previously ignored Jacob now linger near his shop, peering through the glass with a mixture of awe and suspicion. The air in Ash Ridge is thick with whispers, and every eye is turned toward the man who possesses the miraculous touch. Jacob suddenly finds himself an accidental hero, a title he never wanted and one he deeply fears. The local media descends upon him like vultures, their cameras flashing and microphones thrust into his face. They want to know his secret. They want to know if he's a healer, a saint, or a magician. To the townspeople, he is a beacon of hope. But to Jacob, every camera lens feels like a sniper's scope. The miracle he performed has stripped away his anonymity, the one thing that has kept him safe all these years. Back inside the safety of his home, Jacob feels the walls closing in. He paces the floor, his heart hammering against his ribs. For a man with a past as dark and complicated as his, attention isn't just an inconvenience, it's a death sentence. He looks at his hands, the same hands that just performed a miracle, and feels a cold shiver of dread. He knows that the more people talk about his gift, the more likely it is that the wrong people will hear about it. In the shadows of his workshop, Jacob realizes that the price of saving Scout might be his own life. The quiet life he built is gone, replaced by a spotlight that he cannot escape. The fragile peace of the night is shattered, not by a whisper, but by the horrific screech of tearing metal and the explosive burst of glass. On a lonely stretch of the highway, destiny takes a violent turn. A silver SUV, once a vessel of safety, now lies mangled and inverted, a tomb of twisted steel breathing out thick, acrid smoke. Amidst the debris and the smell of leaking gasoline, the silence that follows is more deafening than the crash itself. A heavy, suffocating silence that marks the boundary between life and the void. From the wreckage crawls Emily Harper, her clothes torn and her spirit fractured. But she doesn't weep for her own wounds. In her trembling arms, she cradles Copper, her 3-year-old golden retriever, whose labored breathing is the only sound in the darkness. Copper isn't just a pet. To Emily, he is the last thread of warmth in a cold, indifferent world. As she feels his heartbeat fluttering like a dying bird, a terrifying realization sinks in. The world is trying to take away the only soul that ever loved her unconditionally. This is where desperation transcends logic. Emily doesn't call an ambulance. She doesn't look for a vet. Instead, she remembers the whispers, the urban legends of a man named Jacob who walks the line between the living and the dead. It is a blind, frantic faith born from the depths of a broken heart. She believes, with a conviction that borders on madness, that Jacob can rewrite the ending of this tragedy. To her, he isn't just a man. He is a god of second chances, the only one who can command the soul of her companion to stay. To understand Emily's desperation, one must understand her solitude. In the towering concrete jungle of the city, Emily lived as a ghost among millions, until Copper came along. He was her anchor, her morning sun, and her silent confidant. For someone who has lost everything else, the thought of losing her only reason for living is a fate worse than death itself. Her plea to Jacob isn't just about saving a dog, it's a rebellion against a universe that keeps taking from her. As she stumbles toward Jacob's sanctuary, the air grows heavy with the scent of ozone and ancient dust. She finds him standing in the shadows, his presence as cold and immovable as a mountain. When their eyes meet, the atmosphere crackles with an unspoken tension. Emily offers him her grief, her tears, and a plea that defies the natural order. She challenges the very fabric of fate, demanding that Jacob use his mysterious gifts to snatch a life back from the jaws of the highway carnage. But at what cost does one bargain with the master of shadows? The air in the small clinic grows heavy, suffocatingly thick with the scent of antiseptic and the metallic tang of blood. Jacob's hands, which once seemed to hold the very strings of destiny, are now trembling. He pours every ounce of his will, every secret spark of that mysterious power into Copper, the loyal companion who had been a beacon of light for Emily. But this time, the universe remains deaf to his pleas. The steady rhythm he fought so hard to restore flatlines into a haunting, continuous drone. The miracle that had saved Scout just days ago is nowhere to be found. In the cold, harsh light of the surgery room, the silence that follows is louder than any scream. Then comes the shattering of a soul. Emily doesn't just weep. She breaks. The grief transforms instantly into a jagged blade of resentment, and she turns it toward the only person left to blame. Her voice, cracked and raw, pierces through the room. "Why?" she screams, her fingers trembling as she points at Jacob. "You saved Scout. You brought a dog back from the brink of death when everyone said it was impossible. So why not Copper? Why did you let him go?" Her words are poison, fueled by the agony of loss. You're not a healer, Jacob. You're a judge. You're playing God, choosing who gets to live and who is left to rot. Each word from Emily hits Jacob like a physical blow, stripping away his defenses and dragging him down into a familiar, dark abyss. The walls of the clinic seem to dissolve, replaced by the choking smoke and the crimson mud of a battlefield long ago. The God complex she accuses him of is his oldest scar. He isn't just seeing a dog on a table anymore. He's seeing the faces of his brothers in arms, men whose lifeblood seeped through his fingers while he prayed for a power he didn't yet understand. The guilt he had tried so desperately to bury resurfaces with a vengeance, a suffocating tide of what-ifs and if-onlys. Jacob falls into a hollow silence, the weight of his perceived failure crushing his spirit. He had started to believe that perhaps his gift was a form of redemption, a way to balance the scales for those he couldn't save in the war. But now, the truth is laid bare and brutal. Some lives are beyond even his reach. As Emily's accusations echo in the empty hallway, Jacob realizes that the most terrifying thing about having the power to save is the crushing helplessness when that power finally fails. He is no longer a hero in his own story. He is a man haunted by the ghosts of the living and the dead alike, drowning in a sea of selective mercy. The hero's pedestal is a fragile thing, and for Jacob, it didn't just crack, it shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. As the investigation into the recent anomalies hit a dead end, the tide of public opinion turned with a terrifying speed. The very streets he once protected now felt like a gauntlet of judgment. Whispers followed him like a foul scent. The word fraud was hissed from the shadows of alleyways and splashed across digital headlines. They called his warnings staged, his bravery a calculated performance to gain influence. To the world, Jacob was no longer a guardian. He was a charlatan playing a dangerous game with their fears. In the suffocating silence of his isolation, only one person dared to cross the line drawn by the public's hatred. Dr. Sarah, her face etched with the exhaustion of someone who had seen too much of the world's cruelty, sat across from him. The air in the room was thick with the scent of old paper and sterilized instruments. Jacob's voice was a low growl of frustration, questioning if his silence would have been better than this public crucifixion. Sarah looked him dead in the eye, her voice steady and piercing. "Jacob," she said, "the world is quick to burn the person who holds the torch because the light reveals truths they aren't ready to see. But remember this, in a dying world, the greatest risk isn't failure, it's the cowardice of doing nothing at all." When the door closed and the weight of the world felt heavy enough to crush his ribs, there was Max. The dog didn't care about headlines or the accusations of fraud. Max didn't listen to the whispers on the street. To him, Jacob wasn't a fallen hero or a liar. He was simply his person. In the darkest hours of the night, when Jacob sat on the floor of his darkened apartment, feeling the walls close in, Max would press his heavy head against Jacob's knee, a silent anchor in a storm of betrayal. That steady, rhythmic breathing was the only thing keeping Jacob's sanity from snapping. Max was the silent witness to his pain, the only living soul who knew that the warrior's heart was still beating for the right reasons. But a warrior isn't defined by how he stands in the sunlight. He is defined by how he rises from the mud. The insults, the cold shoulders, and the betrayal of the city he loved began to forge something new inside Jacob. The pain didn't disappear but hardened into a cold, sharp blade of resolve. If they wanted to call him a villain, let them. If they wanted to turn their backs, let them. He realized that he didn't need their permission to save them. As the rain began to pour outside, washing away the filth of the city streets, Jacob stood up, his eyes burning with a renewed, predatory focus. The hunt wasn't over. In fact, for a man who had nothing left to lose, the real battle was only just beginning. The fragile peace of the valley is shattered in a single, heart-stopping second. A deafening roar, more primal than any thunder, tears through the night as an industrial warehouse at the edge of town erupts into a towering pillar of fire. The ground trembles under the force of the blast, sending a shock wave that rattles the very soul of the district. This isn't just a fire. It's a chemical beast, breathing orange heat and spitting toxic black soot into the atmosphere, turning the starlit sky into a suffocating shroud of darkness. But the true horror lies within the heart of the furnace. Somewhere, amidst the twisted metal and the rain of molten sparks, an 8-year-old boy is trapped. He is huddled in a corner, his small hands over his ears, his cries for help drowned out by the rhythmic thrum of the encroaching flames. The air he breathes is thinning, replaced by a lethal cocktail of carbon and chemicals. For him, the world has shrunk to a terrifying cage of heat and shadows, and time is a luxury he no longer possesses. Outside, the scene is one of controlled chaos turning into sheer desperation. The fire brigade, led by Captain Moreno, stands paralyzed. Their thermal imagers are useless against the erratic heat signatures of the chemical vats, and the smoke is so dense that even their most powerful floodlights cannot pierce more than a few inches. The building groans a sickening sound of stressed steel, warning that a total collapse is imminent. To send men in now is a suicide mission. To stay outside is to watch a child perish. In the midst of the flickering red and blue emergency lights, Captain Moreno spots the only two beings capable of navigating a world without sight. He rushes toward the man with the stoic gaze and the German shepherd whose nostrils are already twitching, tasting the scent of the disaster. "Jacob, Max, we're blind in there!" Moreno shouts over the roar of the blaze, his voice cracking with urgency. "The boy is somewhere in the north wing, but we can't find the path." "You're the only ones who can move through that hell." The request is silent but heavy. They are the last hope, the only bridge between a trapped child and the cold air of survival. The heat hits them like a physical wall, a scorching wave of energy that threatens to peel the skin from their bones. But Jacob doesn't flinch. Beside him, Max stands like a statue of courage, his fur singed by the stray embers dancing in the air. The world inside is no longer a home. It is a hungry beast of red and gold, devouring everything in its path. With a final, desperate look at each other, man and dog plunge into the inferno. Inside, the roar of the fire is deafening, a constant low-pitched growl of destruction. Visibility is reduced to mere inches as thick, toxic black smoke fills the hallways. Jacob struggles to breathe, his lungs screaming for oxygen. But Max becomes his eyes and his compass. The dog moves with a supernatural precision, weaving through the labyrinth of falling beams and shattered glass. Max isn't just running, he is hunting for a life amidst the death of the building. He barks a sharp, piercing sound that cuts through the crackle of the flame, signaling Jacob to follow him deeper into the heart of the furnace. They reach the upper floor, where the floorboards groan and sag under their weight. Every step is a gamble with gravity. Jacob's vision begins to blur from the carbon monoxide, his movements growing heavy and sluggish. Just as he feels his strength failing, Max stops abruptly in front of a heavy, charred door. The dog begins to scratch frantically, his paws bleeding, refusing to move an inch. He knows. He can sense the fading spark of life behind the wood. Jacob kicks the door open, a backdraft of heat nearly throwing him backward. In the corner of the room, huddled under a blackened desk, lies the boy. He is small, pale, and eerily still against the backdrop of the raging fire. Max rushes to him first, gently nudging the boy's hand with his wet nose, whining in a way that sounds almost like a prayer. The child doesn't move. He doesn't cough. He is a fragile porcelain doll trapped in a world of melting iron. Jacob scoops the boy into his arms, feeling the terrifying weight of a body that has lost its tension. He presses his ear to the child's chest. Silence. The smoke has done its silent, deadly work. The boy has stopped breathing. In this moment, surrounded by a sea of fire, the silence of the child is louder than the roar of the flames. Jacob looks at Max, the dog's eyes reflecting the orange glow and a profound sadness. They found him, but are they too late? The exit is a mile of fire away, and the clock has already run out. Jacob found him a small, limp figure, huddled in the corner of what used to be a bedroom. The air was a thick soup of toxic black smoke and searing heat that threatened to melt the very skin from his bones. As he pulled the boy into his arms, the weight felt hauntingly familiar, a heavy anchor pulling him back into his darkest memories. This was the moment he had dreaded for years, the nightmare he had lived 1,000 times over in his sleep. The boy wasn't breathing. His pulse was a fading ghost, fluttering weakly and irregularly against Jacob's soot-covered fingertips. Panic, cold and paralyzing, surged through Jacob's veins, clashing violently with the sweltering heat of the inferno. His mind fractured, flashing back to the sterile cold of the operating table, the sharp smell of antiseptic, and the crushing, soul-shattering silence when the heart monitor had finally flatlined. His hands, usually steady enough to navigate the most delicate nerves, began to shake uncontrollably. "Not again," he whispered, his voice cracking and lost in the roar of the flames. "I can't let this happen again." The ghost of his past failure was screaming louder than the crumbling timber around them, telling him he was already too late. Suddenly, a firm, wet pressure hit his hand, snapping the tether of his flashback. Max. The dog stood beside him, fur singed and eyes watering from the acrid smoke, but his gaze was an unwavering anchor of blue light. Max let out a low, grounding huff and nudged Jacob's wrist with his nose, a silent, forceful command to stay present, a reminder that they weren't alone this time. That simple, primal touch broke the spell of trauma. Jacob took a ragged breath of filtered air, gritted his teeth, and locked his focus. This wasn't Copper's end. This was this boy's beginning. Jacob began the resuscitation technique, a specialized high-stakes maneuver he hadn't dared to use since that fateful night. It was a rhythmic dance against death itself. 1, 2, 3, breathe. He used every ounce of his hidden skill, his fingers moving with a desperate, rediscovered precision amidst the chaos. The ceiling groaned ominously above them, showering sparks like lethal rain. But Jacob didn't flinch. He poured his soul, his breath, and his will into the boy's lungs. "Come back," he hissed through gritted teeth, his eyes burning with a fierce, defiant light. "Don't you dare leave." Then, a miracle. A sharp, ragged cough broke through the roar of the fire. The boy's chest heaved, and a weak, high-pitched cry followed the most beautiful sound Jacob had ever heard. He was alive. Jacob didn't wait a second longer. He scooped the child up, signaled to Max, and bolted for the exit as the world turned into a furnace. Just as they leaped through the shattered front door into the cool night air, a deafening roar shook the earth. The entire structure groaned and folded in on itself, a mountain of fire and timber collapsing into the very spot they had stood seconds before. Jacob collapsed onto the grass, gasping for air, the boy safe in his arms and Max standing guard. The debt was paid. The cycle of failure was finally broken. The storm has passed, but the shockwaves of what happened in the darkness are only just beginning to surface. As the city recovers, the mystery surrounding Jacob's impossible rescue begins to unravel. It started with a single piece of grainy security footage recovered from the depths of the drainage system. On those flickering screens, the world finally saw the truth. Jacob wasn't just lucky, he was a force of nature. Every movement was calculated, every breath timed to the millisecond, navigating through the rising black water with a precision that defied logic. The footage was sent to top-tier military medical experts for analysis, and their verdict was chilling. They didn't see a lucky civilian. They saw a master of battlefield medicine. They noted the way he used his bare hands to stabilize a shattered limb, while simultaneously managing a collapsing airway, all while submerged in freezing water. It was a brutal, beautiful fusion of elite combat training and raw, primal instinct. One veteran commander remarked that Jacob wasn't following any known protocol. He was rewriting the rules of survival in real time, fueled by a sheer refusal to let death have its way. In the quiet, sterile hallway of the intensive care unit, Emily Harper stood alone, the weight of her previous judgments pressing down on her like lead. She had called him cold, had questioned his motives, and had doubted his humanity. But seeing the footage and seeing the state of him afterward, exhausted, bloodied, and silence, she finally understood. Jacob wasn't a god, and he wasn't a machine. He was simply a man who had seen so much loss that he had decided once and for all that he would never let go of another soul as long as he had breath in his lungs. She approached his room, not to demand answers, but to offer the one thing she owed him, a sincere apology for failing to see the hero behind the scars. But the greatest revelation wasn't found in a lab or a video file. It was found in the miraculous recovery of Scout. Against every medical odd, the brave canine didn't just survive, he thrived. Just weeks after being pulled from the jaws of the flood, Scout was back on his paws, his tail wagging with a renewed vigor that defied his injuries. Watching him return to the training grounds, his eyes sharp and his spirit unbroken, it became clear that the bond between the man and the dog had formed a shield that even death couldn't pierce. Scout wasn't just a survivor. He was the living proof that Jacob's madness was actually the highest form of mercy. The echoes of the harrowing night have finally faded, replaced by the gentle rustle of autumn leaves and the collective sigh of relief from the people of Ash Ridge. The town square, once a place of whispered fears, is now bathed in the golden warmth of a new beginning. Today, the air isn't thick with tension, but with gratitude. The mayor stands on a makeshift stage, his voice booming over the microphone as he recounts the bravery that saved their community from the darkness. At the center of it all stands a man who never asked for the spotlight, his hand resting firmly on the head of his most loyal companion, the four-legged hero who saw through the shadows when no one else could. When the mayor steps forward, holding a shimmering silver medal of honor, a hush falls over the crowd. It is the highest recognition the town can offer. But Jacob, with a quiet strength that commands more respect than any title, gently raises his hand and declines. He doesn't want to be a monument. He doesn't want his face on a plaque. To him, the survival of the innocent and the silence of the guns are reward enough. He speaks few words, his voice low and steady, stating that he was simply a man doing what was necessary, guided by a partner who never wavered. He isn't a hero in his own eyes, just a survivor who found his way home. Instead of accolades, Jacob asks for something far more meaningful. With the support of the community, he establishes the Guardian's Rest, a sanctuary and rehabilitation center built on the outskirts of the forest. This isn't just a kennel, it's a haven for the silent warrior service dogs who have been wounded in the line of duty, or those who, like Max once did, have lost their way after the trauma of service. Here, among the whispering pines and open fields, Jacob dedicates his life to healing the spirits of these noble animals, turning his own scars into a bridge of understanding for those who cannot speak. As the sun begins to dip behind the jagged peaks of the mountains, casting long, peaceful shadows across the valley, the world finally feels right again. Jacob sits on his porch, the wood creaking softly beneath his weight. Beside him, Max lets out a long, contented sigh, resting his heavy head on Jacob's knee. There are no more monsters in the woods, no more conspiracies in the dark. The storm is past, leaving behind a clarity that only comes after the rain. As the first stars begin to twinkle in the twilight sky, Jacob looks out at the horizon, realizing that for the first time in years, the silence isn't lonely. It's perfect. Peace hasn't just returned to Ashridge, it has finally found a home in his heart. The echoes of the sirens slowly fade into the twilight, leaving behind a silence that speaks louder than any explosion. As the dust settles over the ruins, we are left to contemplate the gravity of everything that has transpired. This wasn't just a battle of wits or a race against time. It was a testament to the lengths one will go to protect what is precious. The smoke may have cleared, but the landscape of our emotions has been forever altered by the courage we witnessed in the darkest of hours. We often call it a miracle when the impossible happens. But looking back at Copper's journey and the relentless pursuit of justice, we realize that miracles aren't just random acts of fate or irrational anomalies. They are the hard-earned results of peak skill, unshakable perseverance, and a brand of love that knows no boundaries. Copper didn't just follow a scent. He followed a bond that transcended the physical world. His sacrifice wasn't a tragedy of chance, but a final, supreme act of devotion that redefined what it means to be a hero. This story leaves us with a profound humanitarian message that resonates long after the screen goes dark. Never turn your back as long as even 1% of hope remains. In a world that often demands we be cynical and move on, these events remind us that the 1% is where the magic lives. It is the margin where lives are saved, where legacies are built, and where the soul finds its true strength. Whether it's a detective chasing a cold lead or a loyal companion refusing to give up, that tiny sliver of hope is the bridge between despair and a miracle. As we close the final chapter of this gripping saga, we are reminded that while heroes may fall, the light they carry continues to burn in those they left behind. Copper's memory will remain a beacon for every person who has ever felt lost in the shadows. His story is a reminder that even in the gritty, cold world of urban crime and complex mysteries, the purest form of loyalty can still change the course of history. Thank you for joining me on this intense and emotional journey through every twist and turn. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed a miracle in your own life? A moment where all hope seemed lost, but something or someone turned the tide. Share your stories in the comments below. Let's keep the spirit of hope alive together. If this story touched your heart or kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We have many more moving reviews and breathtaking stories waiting for you. Until next time, keep believing in that 1%. Goodbye.